My name is Bryan Sieling. I'm an assemblage artist working in the Washington, D.C. area. And I've been toying with assemblage for most of my adult life. But just in the past 6 or 7 years have I really focused on it in earnest. I have a background in museum work, so I've been around interesting objects for my entire professional career. As an exhibit designer, which is what my specific job was, one of the things I enjoyed the most was displaying artifacts and objects in casework and getting them set just so they told a story. So I think all of that kind of plays together with what I do and why I do what I do. The title of my show is called Recontext, and that's because the objects I'm using in my work are in situations very different from what their intended use was. So the objects themselves have sort of been recontextualized, so to speak, in a new format, joined with other things that aren't related to them. So it's kind of a jumble of objects that together create a piece that has a particular aesthetic or expression in some way. I guess I've been interested in objects for a long time. When I was a kid, I had a set of Golden Book encyclopedias. If you're old enough to remember what those are, I still have my set from when I was a child. The cover of each volume is like a trompe-l'oeil grouping of all the various odds and ends of subject matter that's in that particular volume. So the covers of those books, I would study them for hours. And I can kind of trace that back to my interest in working with disparate objects all the way back to that set of encyclopedias. And I realized that I need to have an inventory of objects to work with. So about 30 years ago, I started collecting with the intent of making things when I retired. Well, that day's finally come. And so now I have a whole basement shop full of all kinds of things that I have kind of filed away in like things together. As I'm working on a piece, I can remember, oh, I have this over here. I'll pull it out. I'll give it a try. It may work. It may not. I'll put it back, and I'll just sort of keep working with things until I find something that kind of works together and kind of gels together. So this is a piece called Time's Up, and as you can see, it's a cuckoo clock that's kind of upended and partly dismantled. The gong for the clock is all the way at the base of the piece. The fancy wood carving that would line the roof line has been taken off and turned upside down and placed in a decorative position on the front of the piece. And then the weights are still hanging as weights, but because it's upside down, they have to be routed through some pulleys to get them in that position. I didn't set out to make an upside down cuckoo clock. When my friend Laura brought this to me, I couldn't set it down on my workbench in an upright position because there wasn't a stable base the way it's made. I naturally just set it on its roof for stability. And as soon as I did that, I'm like, that looks pretty neat. And then I proceeded from there to figure out, well, how can I make a piece out of this with this clock in this position? And then as that progressed, I started to think about COVID and the pandemic and how the passage of time was almost upended. That's what I really love about the work that I do, is that I never really know where it's going to go and where it's going to end up. I mean, I kind of guide the process aesthetically and sometimes narratively, but I just follow the objects. This is a piece called Quarantine. One morning, my wife noticed that my next door neighbor was throwing away this old wooden clothes drying rack. And she grabbed it for me and said, "What do you think about this?" And I said, "Sure." So I had it for several months. It was obvious that when it's sort of partially set up, it had this shape of like a house or a hut. And that was always kind of in the back of my mind. Then my sister-in-law found all these little linoleum tile samples of all kinds of different colors. So I had those. I don't know how I ended up putting the tile samples together with the house. I think I must have made a mental connection of a tile floor where they would normally go with this house structure that this drying rack kind of could make. Then I was struggling with what to do on the surface. I know it needed something on the surface of the tiles. And I had a bunch of little plastic figures about 1 inch tall in different colors. And I was going to stand one of those on each tile square. And that's kind of where it was at when I went to a yard sale one day. And I found this figure of this woman. She was part of a marble bookend. And the marble was all cracked, and so I took her off the marble bookend, and it was just an obvious marriage of putting her in the center of this piece. And so then it became Quarantine. She's sort of trapped in this house that almost looks like a jail. I've set her on the colorful tiles because her world is pretty much limited to this small spot in her home. And I put all the black and white tiles around the perimeter because it's sort of as you would gravitate to the outside world, it started to get very gray. I think my goal with every piece is to create something that's just visually interesting to look at. I want to create something that has a little bit of intrigue, that draws you closer. The viewer then begins to wonder, well, why are these things together? You know, they may bring their own experiences to the piece and create some sort of relationship or story within their own mind about what it is. I rarely have an intent with any piece. I want that to be open-ended for the viewer. Sometimes things turn out a little more literally than others. I have a piece called City, which is made up of a series of folding carpenter's rulers that are all side by side. And when I laid them on my bench like that, I said, well, those look like skyscrapers. So I made a piece that had a little car and a little, what represents a moon in the sky. And you know, that's a representational piece. Other pieces are really non-objective, non-representational. It's just a collection of pieces that I feel work together visually. I have a lot of time on my hands now, and I have a lot of things in my shop. So I'll just continue what I'm doing. So far, I'm enjoying it.